Oblivious to the fact that her wheelchair-bound husband had quietly come into a colossal, multi-trillion-dollar fortune, Rachel Porter left him and their young son to pursue a wealthy businessman. What unfolded next demolished her carefully crafted facade and destroyed the privileged existence she'd built in ways she could never have anticipated. The woman who had once dismissed her paralyzed husband from their luxury apartment now observed from the sidelines as he rose to his feet, directing corporate meetings spanning 6 continents. Yet the truth that shattered her world didn't stem from his vast wealth or his miraculous physical recovery. It emerged from the boy she'd abandoned, now the sole beneficiary of everything she'd discarded. How had the man she'd considered worthless evolved into the most influential presence in international commerce? What mystery had he harbored behind those years of quiet suffering and apparent vulnerability? And why did the child she'd left behind regard her with eyes reflecting not anger, but something far more crushing? Compassion. The downpour beat relentlessly against the expansive glass windows of the Horizon Plaza ballroom, yet Rachel Porter scarcely registered it as she fussed with the emerald pendant draped across her throat. Its heaviness felt appropriate, felt warranted. Yet the image gazing back at her from the gleaming granite pillar wore an expression she struggled to identify. Tonight celebrated her engagement celebration with Marcus Whitmore, the property developer whose financial standing had dominated Business Weekly for 3 consecutive months. Yet something within her tightened as the chamber ensemble commenced their 4th Bach composition. "You're stunning, darling," Marcus murmured, his palm claiming on her waist, though his attention was already surveying the space for his professional contacts. Rachel smiled, the practiced smile she'd refined throughout the previous 8 months, the expression that concealed everything authentic, everything that still jolted her awake at 3 in the morning with her pulse racing. The ballroom sparkled with Chicago's privileged class, yet Rachel's thoughts wandered to a modest flat in the South Side, to the man she'd abandoned with separation documents and a payment she deemed reasonable at the time. 3 years had elapsed since she'd departed from Michael Harrison and their 4-year-old boy, Lucas, yet the recollection still bore the jagged edges of justification she'd constructed around it, like protective armor. Michael had been disabled, his lower body immobilized from a vehicle collision 2 years following their wedding. Yet that wasn't her reason for leaving, she reminded herself for the 1000th occasion. It was the financial struggle, the never-ending hospital expenses, the cramped apartment that reeked of medical supplies and shattered aspirations. Yet primarily, it was the expression in his gaze that had pushed her away. That understanding, patient expression that suggested he comprehended her better than she grasped herself. "Rachel, darling, meet the Carltons," Marcus summoned, though his voice seemed distant, hollow, as though he were calling from beneath deep water. She navigated through the assembly with rehearsed elegance, yet her stilettos felt precarious on the buffed flooring. The Carltons represented generational wealth, the variety that spoke softly rather than proclaimed, yet their greetings were solid, their expressions sharp as broken glass. They discussed vacation estates in Martha's Vineyard and winter seasons in Vail, yet Rachel found herself nodding mechanically, her consciousness elsewhere. The memory struck her unexpectedly. Lucas's 4th birthday celebration, the last one she had attended. Michael had somehow accumulated sufficient funds for a modest pastry from the budget bakery, yet the birthday candles had been unmatched, retrieved from a container of miscellaneous items. Her son's face had illuminated in that candlelight, yet Rachel had experienced only embarrassment, only the oppressive burden of an existence she hadn't chosen. "I'm going to find someone who can provide us with everything," she'd confessed to Michael that evening after Lucas had drifted to sleep, gripping a worn teddy that had seen better days. "Someone who isn't damaged." Michael had regarded her from his wheelchair, his arms still strong despite everything else, yet he'd merely acquiesced. "If that's your need," he'd stated softly, "then leave, but keep Lucas with me." The recollection of that exchange still possessed the capacity to steal her oxygen, yet Rachel suppressed it, concealed it beneath layers of champagne and congratulations. She'd executed her decision, yet decisions carried consequences she'd been too inexperienced to comprehend. "Mrs. Porter, or perhaps I should address you as the future Mrs. Whitmore," a voice penetrated her contemplations, smooth as liquid silk, yet edged with something sharper. Rachel pivoted to find herself confronting a woman in her 60s, impeccably attired in haute couture, yet with eyes that seemed to pierce straight through her expensive veneer. "I'm Elizabeth Wong," the woman proceeded, offering a hand weighted with refined jewelry. "I represent the Harrison family holdings." The surname impacted Rachel like a physical strike, yet she recomposed herself swiftly, her social facade sliding back into position. "I'm apologize, I don't believe we're acquainted," she stated cautiously, yet her heart was pounding against her ribcage. Elizabeth's smile failed to illuminate her eyes. "No, we haven't met, yet I'm quite familiar with you, dear. I'm aware, for example, that you were wed to Michael Harrison. I understand you left when he needed you most. Yet what you don't know, what you've been blissfully unaware of for 3 years, is that the man you deserted inherited one of the most substantial fortunes in modern history 6 months after your departure." The ballroom seemed to shift, yet Rachel clutched the stem of her champagne flute more firmly. "I'm uncertain what you're referencing," she managed, yet her voice sounded fragile even to her own perception. "Michael's grandfather, a man who'd accumulated his wealth in emerging technology and global commerce before those industries exploded, passed away 18 months after your marriage. He'd excluded Michael from the estate years previously, disappointed by his grandson's decision to pursue community advocacy instead of corporate pursuits. Yet something transformed when he learned of the collision. He observed Michael from afar, watched how he managed his disability with dignity, how he raised his son alone following your departure. Yet the old man was conventional. He waited, wanted assurance that Michael was truly deserving." Rachel's mind was spinning, yet she compelled herself to remain motionless, to maintain her expression impassive. Marcus was across the space, chuckling too boisterously at someone's witticism, yet he hadn't detected this exchange yet. "The inheritance was distributed 6 months following your divorce's finalization," Elizabeth stated quietly, inclining closer. "3 trillion in accessible assets, real estate spanning 40 nations, and majority ownership in 17 Global 500 corporations." Yet Michael didn't access it, not immediately. He dedicated the initial year to physical rehabilitation, experimental procedures that his newfound wealth could finally purchase. The physicians claimed it was unachievable, yet Michael never accepted impossibility. The champagne glass slipped from Rachel's fingers, yet it didn't fragment. A server intercepted it with practiced skill, substituted it with a napkin. "That's impossible," Rachel whispered. Yet even as she articulated it, she recognized it was accurate. She could perceive it in Elizabeth's gaze, in the manner the woman regarded her with something between disdain and sympathy. "He ambulates now," Elizabeth proceeded. In each utterance was a nail in Rachel's meticulously assembled coffin. has for approximately 18 months, yet he kept it secrecy, kept everything private. He didn't desire the scrutiny, didn't want Lucas maturing in that glare. Yet beyond that, I suspect he desired to observe your actions, whether you'd return, whether you'd even question. The environment was excessively warm, excessively bright, yet Rachel couldn't shift. Images flashed through her consciousness. Michael in his wheelchair, his patient gaze, his tender hands on Lucas's small shoulders. Yet now those images were superimposed with something else. Michael standing, Michael ambulating, Michael commanding the variety of authority that made Marcus appear like a child engaging in pretend. "Why are you revealing this?" Rachel finally inquired, yet her voice fractured on the final word. Elizabeth's expression shifted, became almost tender. "Because tomorrow morning, the Harrison Foundation is revealing its most significant initiative yet. $100 billion allocated to disability assistance, accessible health care, and resources for solo parents. Yet the media briefing isn't solely regarding the funding. Michael is emerging from obscurity. He's claiming his position in society. Yet beyond that, he's sharing his narrative. Your narrative. The woman who abandoned him because he was broken, because he couldn't furnish the existence you desired. The woman who never realized she'd left everything she'd been pursuing." The words descended like blows, yet Rachel remained upright through sheer willpower. "He wouldn't," she stated, yet it sounded like an inquiry even to herself. "He won't identify you, won't be malicious," Elizabeth concurred. "Yet the details are detailed enough that anyone familiar with you both will comprehend. Yet that's not the part that will devastate you, dear. That's not what will demolish your pride and obliterate this new existence you've constructed." Rachel desired to leave, desired to flee, yet her feet might as well have been fixed to the floor. "What then?" she whispered. Elizabeth's smile was now melancholic, almost sympathetic. "Lucas, your son, the boy you deserted for this," she gestured around the ballroom at the crystal fixtures and the designer gowns and the carefully assembled wealth. "He's 8 now, yet he's exceptional. Michael enrolled him in premier institutions, gave him every advantage, yet beyond that, he conversed with Lucas about you. Truthfully, no resentment, no fury, merely the facts. Yet the facts are sometimes the most devastating tool of all." The environment was rotating, yet Rachel compelled herself to focus. What did he communicate? His mother cared for him, yet that she valued other things more, Elizabeth stated simply. That occasionally people execute decisions that hurt others, yet that doesn't transform them into villains, merely human. Yet Lucas is intelligent enough to understand what that signifies. He's intelligent enough to perceive the difference between the father who remained and the mother who didn't. Yet here's what will break you, Rachel. Lucas doesn't hate you. He pities you. The word hung in the atmosphere between them, more condemning than any accusation. "No," Rachel exhaled, yet even as she refuted it, she recognized it was accurate. Tomorrow's media briefing includes a video presentation. Lucas created it himself, a demonstration about the importance of character over circumstances, about how genuine strength isn't measured in bank accounts or functioning limbs, yet in the decisions we make when everything is stripped away. Yet the ending image is a photograph. You, Michael, and Lucas from that last birthday celebration, the one with the mismatched candles and the second-hand bear. Yet in Lucas's narrative, he talks about how that was the happiest day of his early childhood, not despite the poverty, yet because everyone he loved was present. Yet then he talks about what happened next, how his mother left, how his father remained, how he learned that love isn't about what you have, it's about what you're prepared to sacrifice.
Rachel's legs finally gave way, yet she caught herself on the granite pillar, her manicured nails scraping against the cold stone. Across the space, Marcus had finally noticed something was amiss, yet he was navigating over with obvious reluctance, his expression irritated rather than concerned. "Why?" Rachel inquired again, yet this time the question was broader, encompassing everything. Why is he executing this?
Elizabeth's expression softened completely. Because Lucas requested him to, yet not from vengeance. Your son desires you to comprehend what you relinquished, not because he desires you to suffer, because he desires you to grow. Yet there's more, Rachel. Michael has established a fund in your designation, $10 million, completely yours, no conditions attached, yet it accompanies a letter from Lucas, explaining that he hopes this funding will assist you in discovering whatever it was you were seeking when you departed. Yet if it doesn't, if you're still hollow after all this, then perhaps you'll comprehend that it was never regarding the money at all. The cruelty of that kindness was staggering, yet Rachel grasped it immediately. Michael wasn't demolishing her pride through vengeance, he was demolishing it through grace, through a generosity that highlighted precisely how diminutive her own decisions had been. Tomorrow, Elizabeth stated quietly, the world will comprehend Michael Harrison's narrative, yet they'll also grasp what you discarded. Not merely the money, the man, the son, the existence that mattered. Yet tonight, you still possess this. She gestured around the ballroom again at Marcus, who was almost within earshot now, his face crimson with irritation. "What was that regarding?" Marcus demanded, but his tone was sharp, possessive. "You appear like you've witnessed a specter." Rachel regarded him, genuinely regarded him for the initial time in months. Marcus Whitmore, with his Business Weekly featured wealth and his connections and his penthouse perspectives, yet also with his wandering gaze and his conditional affection and his love that came with price markers and prenuptial contracts. She'd exchanged Michael's steady presence for this, had exchanged Lucas's small hand in hers for invitations to celebrations where nobody recognized her designation without consulting the guest registry first. "I'm not well," she heard herself articulate, yet her voice sounded like it was originating from very far away. "I need to depart." Marcus's irritation flared into genuine anger. "This is our engagement celebration, Rachel. You can't simply depart. What will people conclude?" What will people conclude? The question that had driven so many of her decisions. Yet suddenly, Rachel comprehended that she'd been asking the incorrect question all along. It wasn't regarding what people concluded, it was regarding what she could coexist with when the lights extinguished and she was isolated with her decisions. "I apologize," she stated, yet she was already advancing toward the exit, her expensive stilettos clicking against marble that suddenly felt like ice beneath her. She could hear Marcus sputtering, hear the murmur of confused guests, yet she didn't halt, couldn't halt. The downpour struck her the instant she stepped out, yet she welcomed it, tilted her face upward to let it cleanse away 3 years of carefully applied cosmetics. Her phone was in her clutch, yet her hands trembled as she extracted it, as she searched for news regarding Michael Harrison. The results loaded gradually, yet each headline was another knife rotation. Reclusive tycoon to initiate record-shattering foundation. Tech heirs silence. Harrison legacy proceeds with revolutionary healthcare initiative. Yet none of the articles referenced his disability, his recovery, the miracle of him ambulating again. Because apparently that wasn't the narrative. The narrative was what he was doing with his second opportunity, with his impossible wealth, with the platform he'd never requested, yet was using anyway. Rachel's taxi arrived, yet she didn't enter immediately.
Instead, she stood in the downpour, scrolling through article after article, searching for some reference of herself, yet there was nothing. Michael had kept her excluded completely, had protected her as he stepped into the glare. Yet Elizabeth was right. That protection was its own form of exposure, because anyone who knew their narrative would complete the blanks. The apartment Michael had occupied with Lucas was in the South Side, yet Rachel found herself providing that address instead of her own sleek Lincoln Park loft. It was nearly midnight, yet she needed to see it, needed to comprehend what she had abandoned. The building appeared smaller than she recalled, more decrepit, yet the lights were still illuminated in what had been their third-floor walk-up. Rachel stood on the rain-slicked pavement, staring upward at those windows, yet she couldn't compel herself to enter. What would she even state? Her phone vibrated, Marcus, furious and demanding, yet she silenced it without reading the complete message. Another vibration. Her mother, who'd been at the party, probably demanding explanations, yet she silenced that too. A third vibration, yet this one was from an unidentified number. She almost ignored it, yet something made her access the message. It was a video file, and against her better judgment, Rachel clicked activate. Lucas's face filled the screen, more mature than she recalled, yet with Michael's eyes and her own determined chin. He was standing in what looked like a library, surrounded by books and light, yet his expression was serious beyond his years.
"Hi, Mom," he stated, and Rachel's knees buckled. She sat down forcefully on the wet curb, rain saturating through her expensive dress, yet she couldn't look away from the screen. "Dad stated I could transmit this to you if I desired, yet he also stated I should wait until I was certain. I'm certain now." Lucas glanced downward at something off-screen, notes perhaps, or perhaps merely gathering his courage. "I don't recall you very clearly, yet Dad has numerous photographs, and he shares narratives, positive narratives, about how you used to sing to me, about how you prepared the best pancakes, about how you attempted genuinely hard even when things were difficult. But I comprehend why you departed. Dad explained it. He stated you were seeking something you thought you'd misplaced, and you believed you'd discover it somewhere else." The video was time-stamped from 3 weeks previously, yet Lucas's words were clearly, carefully contemplated. "I desired you to know that we're okay, but I also desired you to know that I forgive you, even though Dad states you didn't execute anything that requires my forgiveness. He states you made a decision, and that everyone has the right to make decisions. But I'm 8 now, and I'm mature enough to comprehend that some decisions wound people, even when we don't intend them to." Rachel was crying now, but silently, her shoulders trembling as rain mixed with tears on her face. "Tomorrow, Dad is going to communicate to everyone about our story, yet he's not executing it to wound you. He's executing it because he desires people to comprehend that disability doesn't define value, that circumstances don't define character. Yet I requested him to let me articulate something too, and this is what I desire to articulate. I wished you'd remained, yet I comprehend why you didn't, and I hope you discover what you're seeking. I genuinely do. But if you ever desire to converse, if you ever desire to meet for coffee or something, Dad states that would be acceptable with him. It would be acceptable with me, too." The video concluded, yet Rachel couldn't shift. She sat on that wet curb, her phone clutched in both hands, and felt every carefully assembled wall she'd constructed around her decisions crumble to nothing. A vehicle arrived, not her taxi, which had long since departed, yet a black sedan with tinted windows. The rear door opened, yet nobody exited. Instead, Elizabeth Wong's voice carried from inside. "He knew you'd arrive here, knew you'd need to witness it, yet he's not there. He and Lucas are at the foundation offices preparing for tomorrow. But if you desire to encounter them, if you desire to actually converse instead of merely observing, there's room in this vehicle." Rachel regarded the apartment windows again.
yet they seemed impossibly distant now, separated by more than merely 3 floors and a few years. They were separated by decisions, by consequences, by the existence she'd departed from and the man who'd constructed something extraordinary from the ruin she'd left behind. "What if I can't face them?" Rachel whispered, yet she was already standing, already moving toward the vehicle. "Then you can't," Elizabeth stated simply. "Yet fleeing again won't transform what transpires tomorrow. It won't transform what you forfeited, yet confronting it might transform what transpires next." Rachel slid into the vehicle, yet she couldn't articulate. The leather seats were butter soft, the interior climate-controlled and perfect, yet she couldn't feel any of it. All she could contemplate was Lucas's face on that video, Michael's patient gaze in her memories, and the 3 years she'd spent constructing an existence on a foundation of fleeing. The foundation offices were in a gleaming tower in the loop, yet the building was mostly dark, except for the uppermost floor. Elizabeth led her to a private elevator, entered a code, yet stated nothing as they ascended. The silence was profound, providing excessive time to contemplate, excessive space for panic. The elevator doors opened onto a vast office space, yet it wasn't cold or corporate. Instead, it felt inhabited, human, with photographs covering one entire wall. Michael and Lucas at baseball games, on hiking expeditions, at school functions, living an existence Rachel hadn't been part of, memories that didn't include her. "He's in the conference room," Elizabeth stated quietly, "down the hall. Yet I should warn you, he's different from the man you recall, not because of the money, or even because he can ambulate again, yet because he's made peace with who he is, with what transpired. Yet that doesn't state seeing you won't be difficult for him. Just be kind to both of you." Rachel acknowledged, yet she couldn't find words. She moved down that corridor on legs that felt like liquid, past office doors with nameplates she didn't recognize, past evidence of an existence and career and purpose that had flourished without her. The conference room door was ajar, and through it Rachel could see him. Michael was standing at the window, his back to the door, yet his posture was confident, strong. He was taller than she recalled, or perhaps he merely stood straighter now that pain wasn't his constant companion. Lucas sat at the conference table working on a laptop, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, precisely the way Michael used to do. Rachel must have made some sound because both of them pivoted, yet their reactions couldn't have been more different. Lucas's face lit up with something between hope and uncertainty, yet Michael's expression was carefully neutral, guarded in a manner she'd never witnessed from him before. "Rachel," Michael stated, and his voice was the same, warm, steady, yet there was distance in it now, the space carved out by 3 years of absence. "Elizabeth stated you might arrive here," Michael stated quietly, moving away from the window. "And that's when I genuinely saw it, the ease of his movement, the absence of pain that had always lingered at the edges of his expression, yet also something else, confidence, purpose, the bearing of a man who'd confronted the worst and emerged stronger." "Dad," Lucas stated softly, glancing between them. "Should I stay?" "Stay," both Rachel and Michael stated simultaneously, yet then Michael added, "If you desire to, this concerns you too." Lucas acknowledged, yet his eyes never departed Rachel's face. She could see him cataloging details, her ruined dress, her smeared makeups, the manner she stood uncertain in the doorway, like a stranger in a stranger's residence. "I didn't know," Rachel stated, and the words came out broken. "About the inheritance, about any of it. Yet that's not an excuse. That's not why I arrived." "Why did you arrive?" Michael inquired, yet his tone wasn't harsh, merely curious. "After 3 years, after constructing your new existence, why now?" Rachel finally stepped fully into the room, yet she maintained distance between them. "Because I watched you leaving that birthday party on repeat in my consciousness for 3 years, yet I convinced myself I'd executed the right decision, that you and Lucas would be better off without me dragging you down, that I was doing everyone a favor. Yet then Elizabeth communicated to me about tomorrow, about what you're revealing, and I realized—" She broke off, yet Michael waited, patient as always.
"I realized I didn't depart because you were disabled," Rachel proceeded, her voice strengthening. "I departed because I was disabled, not in my legs, in my heart, in my capacity to perceive what mattered. Yet you already knew that, didn't you? You knew all along." Michael's expression softened slightly. "I knew you were unhappy, yet I also knew I couldn't provide you what you thought you required. Not then. The collisions stripped so much from me, my mobility, my career prospects, my capacity to provide. Yet I had to discover that those things weren't what defined me, weren't what made me worthy of love. Yet you needed to discover that too, and I couldn't instruct you. You had to determine it yourself." "Did I?" Rachel inquired, yet it was a genuine question. "Have I determined it, or am I merely here because I finally comprehend the magnitude of what I relinquished?" The question suspended in the atmosphere, yet it was Lucas who answered. "Does it matter?" he inquired, his young voice cutting through the tension. "I mean, does it matter why you're here, as long as you're actually witnessing us, actually attempting?" Rachel regarded her son, genuinely regarded him for the initial time since she'd advanced into the room. He was so much more mature than 4 now, yet beyond that, he was wise in manners that fractured her heart. He'd matured without her, yet he'd matured well, and that was entirely Michael's execution. "I don't know if I possess the right to attempt," Rachel admitted. "I departed. I selected Marcus and his money over you and your father. Yet I wasn't merely incorrect about what mattered. I was malicious." "You were human, Rachel. You were human, Rachel. Yet humans execute mistakes. They get frightened and they flee. Yet they also possess the capacity to grow, to transform, to choose differently." Rachel's tears came freely now, yet she didn't conceal them. "I don't deserve your grace," she whispered. "Probably not," Michael concurred, yet there was no meanness in it. "Yet grace isn't about deserving, it's about selecting to provide something anyway. Yet I'm not offering you redemption, Rachel. I'm not offering you a place back in our existences like nothing transpired. Yet if you're genuinely here to comprehend, to acknowledge what transpired and assume responsibility, then we can converse. We can see if there's a path forward, yet it won't be easy, and it won't erase the past." Rachel nodded, but she couldn't articulate. She regarded Lucas, at the hope carefully tempered with caution in his eyes, and comprehended that this moment was a gift she didn't deserve, yet was being provided anyway. "The media briefing is tomorrow at 9, Michael stated. You're welcome to be there or not, that's your decision. Yet either manner, the narrative is proceeding. The truth about what transpired, about the decisions we all executed. Yet Lucas and I have already processed this. We've already healed as much as we can without you. Yet if you desire to be part of healing with us, that's different, that's new. Yet it requires showing up, actually showing up, not merely when it's convenient or when you're frightened of appearing inadequate." "I want to," Rachel stated, yet her voice was small. "I want to show up, yet I don't know if I know how anymore." Lucas stood, then advanced over to her with his father's steady confidence, yet when he reached her, he didn't embrace her. Instead, he held out his hand. "Then perhaps we determine it out together," he stated simply. "Not like before, not pretending nothing transpired, yet like people who wounded each other, yet want to execute better." Rachel accepted his hand, yet the touch sent shockwaves through her entire system. This was her son, yet he was also a stranger, and bridging that gap would require more than one conversation, more than one moment of clarity. "Tomorrow," Michael stated, "the world is going to see our narrative, yet they're going to see it through the lens of resilience, of overcoming, of choosing to construct something positive from something broken. Yet what they won't see is this moment right here, where we're all standing in the wreckage of what was and attempting to decide what comes next. Yet that's the genuine narrative, Rachel. Not the money, not the miraculous recovery, yet the decision to persist, attempting even when it would be simpler to depart. The words struck Rachel like a physical strike because she heard the echo of her own decision in them, yet Michael's face held no accusation, only a melancholy sort of comprehension. "I need to communicate to Marcus," Rachel heard herself articulate. "I need to end that before I can even contemplate what comes next." "Do you want to?" Lucas inquired, yet his grip on her hand had tightened slightly. "Colder. End, I mean. Or do you feel like you have to because of us?" The maturity of the question staggered her. "Both," Rachel admitted. "I want to because I finally see what I've been hiding from. Yet I have to because remaining with him would be repeating the same mistake, merely in a different direction. But mostly I want to because I need to prove to myself that I can make a difficult decision for the right reasons instead of a simple decision for the incorrect ones." Michael nodded slowly. "Then that's what you should do. Yet Rachel, don't do it tonight. Don't do it in reaction to this. Go home, sleep on it. Make sure you're choosing, not merely reacting." The wisdom in that made Rachel want to weep. Yet this was the man she'd abandoned, yet he was also so much more than the man she'd known. He'd grown in her absence, had become someone she might not recognize if she'd encountered him on the street. Yet the core of him, that patient, steady core, was still there. "Thank you," she whispered, yet the words felt insufficient for everything she desired to articulate. "We'll see you tomorrow," Michael stated, yet it wasn't quite a question. "At the media briefing or after. Your decision. Yet we'll see you." It was both a promise and a challenge, yet Rachel understood both. She nodded, squeezed Lucas's hand once more, and turned to depart. Elizabeth was waiting by the elevator, yet her expression was unreadable. "How did it go?" she inquired as the doors closed. "I don't know," Rachel admitted, "yet I think that's the point. I think I'm supposed to not know, yet persist showing up anyway." "Then perhaps you're finally finding what your ex-husband already knows, that the only manner forward is one uncertain step at a time, yet accepting those steps anyway."
The ride downward was silent, yet Rachel's consciousness was screaming. She'd spent 3 years constructing an existence based on fleeing from uncertainty, from difficulty, from anything that required her to be uncomfortable. Yet now she stood on the edge of something entirely different, a chance to be uncomfortable on purpose, to select difficulty because it led somewhere genuine. The downpour had ceased by the time Elizabeth's vehicle deposited her at her Lincoln Park loft, yet the street still gleamed wetly under the streetlights. Rachel's phone had been vibrating non-stop during the drive. Marcus, her mother, friends from the celebration demanding gossip, yet she silenced it all. Inside her apartment, surrounded by expensive furniture and carefully assembled art, Rachel felt the full burden of her decisions crash over her. This place was beautiful yet hollow, impressive yet empty, and she'd exchanged her family for it. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by her window and observed the city awaken, observed the sun rise over buildings full of people executing their own decisions, their own mistakes, their own attempts at redemption. Somewhere in the South Side, in an apartment she'd once fled, Michael and Lucas were probably executing the same thing, yet together. At 7 in the morning, Rachel called Marcus, yet she didn't wait for pleasantries. "I can't marry you," she stated simply. "I apologize for the chaos at the celebration, sorry for wasting your time, yet I need to conclude this cleanly." Marcus's response was immediate and volcanic. "Are you insane? Do you comprehend what you're discarding? Who I am?" And there it was, the question that had driven Rachel for 3 years, yet suddenly she possessed an answer. "Yes," she stated quietly, "I know precisely who you are. Yet more significantly, I finally know who I am, yet I don't appreciate her very much. I need to determine how to transform that." She disconnected before he could respond, yet the finality of it felt appropriate, felt clean. One door closing, yet what arrived next was entirely uncertain. The media briefing was being conducted at the Harrison Foundation's new headquarters, a converted historic building in downtown Chicago that Michael had apparently restored personally. Rachel arrived early, yet stayed in the rear of the press room, anonymous in jeans and a simple sweater that felt like armor compared to last night's designer dress. The room filled rapidly, journalists, photographers, foundation staff, yet Rachel kept her eyes on the podium, waiting. When Michael advanced out in front, the room erupted in camera flashes, yet he moved through it with ease. He was wearing a simple suit, yet he commanded the space like he'd been executing this his entire existence. Lucas advanced beside him, small yet confident, and Rachel's heart clenched at the sight. Michael's address was everything Elizabeth had promised, powerful, moving, focused on the Foundation's mission, yet also deeply personal. He discussed his collision, about learning to live with disability, about the challenges that seemed insurmountable, yet he also discussed Lucas, about fatherhood, about discovering purpose and helping others navigate paths he'd already advanced. He never referenced Rachel by designation, yet he didn't have to. "I discovered," he stated, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed room, "that the people who remain with you in the darkness matter more than those who only want to stand in your illumination. Yet I also discovered that everyone's journey is their own. Some people aren't ready to confront difficulty until they've exhausted every avenue of escape, yet that doesn't transform them into villains, it transforms them into human." The grace of it fractured Rachel completely, yet she remained silent, remained motionless. Then it was Lucas's turn, yet he didn't read from notes. Instead, he articulated from his heart. "My dad taught me that strength isn't about being perfect, it's about getting back upright, yet also about letting people see you when you're down. Yet the most important thing he taught me is that love isn't about what you have, it's about what you give, and you can only give what you've learned to receive." The presentation included the video Lucas had created, yet it was different from the one Rachel had seen. This version was public, carefully edited to respect privacy while still communicating truth, yet the photograph at the conclusion was the same: Rachel, Michael, and Lucas, before everything broke. When the presentation concluded, the questions began, yet Michael managed them with the same grace he'd shown throughout. Yes, he was ambulating again. Yes, the inheritance had transformed his life, yet no, wealth was not what saved him. Purpose had, love had, the daily decision to keep showing up even when every instinct screamed to surrender. Rachel waited until the media briefing concluded, until the crowd began to disperse, yet she didn't approach. Instead, she caught Michael's eye across the space, and in that brief connection, she saw everything she needed to understand. He'd told their story, yet he'd protected her in the communication. He'd been honest without being malicious, truthful without being vindictive. She mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Michael acknowledged once, yet then Lucas was tugging on his sleeve, pointing at something. In the moment past, Rachel left without speaking to them, yet this time it wasn't fleeing away. It was recognizing that the media briefing was their moment, their story to tell, and her presence would have transformed it about her instead of about them. Yet she was there. She showed up. That was a start. Over the following weeks, Rachel dismantled her old existence, methodically, yet completely. She concluded things with Marcus formally, endured her mother's disappointment and her social circle's gossip, yet she executed it all with a strange sense of peace. She wasn't fleeing towards something this time, yet away from people and places that had never been genuine. She commenced therapy, genuine therapy, yet she didn't communicate to Michael or Lucas about it. This wasn't for them, it was for her. Yet it was also the initial step toward becoming someone who might deserve a second opportunity. She accepted the $10 million from the fund Michael had established, yet she didn't touch it beyond investing it conservatively. She didn't deserve that money yet. Perhaps someday she'd determine how to utilize it for something that mattered. She acquired a position at a nonprofit that helped low-income families navigate the healthcare system. Unglamorous work that paid a fraction of what Marcus would have provided her, yet that made her feel human again. Yet most significantly, she transmitted Lucas letters, not emails, not texts, yet actual handwritten letters about her existence, her therapy, the things she was discovering. Yet she never requested forgiveness. She never requested a place in his existence. She merely showed up on paper, week after week. 3 months following the media briefing, Lucas wrote back, yet his letter was brief. Dad says we can have coffee if you want, Saturday at 10. There's a place near us. Rachel cried over that letter for an hour, yet then she wrote back, I'd appreciate that very much. The coffee establishment was small, cramped, nothing like the places she used to frequent with Marcus, yet Michael and Lucas were already there when she arrived. They'd chosen a corner table, yet left her a seat facing both of them. Hi, Rachel stated, yet the word felt inadequate for the moment. Hi, Lucas replied, yet he was smiling, small, cautious, yet genuine. Michael didn't articulate anything, yet he pushed a cup of coffee toward her. Black, 2 sugars, the manner she used to drink it before she decided that was too pedestrian. They conversed for 2 hours, yet they didn't talk about the past. Instead, they talked about Lucas's school, about Michael's foundation work, about the small moments that composed their daily existences. Yet Rachel contributed too, talked to them about her position, about her therapy, about the tiny apartment she'd rented in Wicker Park that had terrible water pressure, yet great illumination. When it was time to depart, Lucas embraced her, yet it was brief, still uncertain. Same time next week? He inquired. If you want, Rachel stated, yet she couldn't keep the hope out of her voice. We want, Michael stated quietly, speaking for the initial time in 20 minutes. Yet, Rachel, this is a long road. There's no finish line where everything is suddenly repaired. I know, she said, and she meant it, but I'm finding that showing up for the long road is superior to sprinting toward the incorrect destination. Michael smiled then, yet it was melancholy and proud and complicated. Then we'll see you next week. That became their rhythm. Weekly coffee, careful conversations, building something new from the ruins of what had been. Yet Rachel never asked more than they offered, never pushed. She'd finally discovered that love wasn't about taking, it was about being present, about showing up consistently, about earning trust through actions rather than words. 6 months following that initial coffee meeting, Michael invited her to Lucas's 9th birthday party, yet he was careful to set boundaries. It's at our place, and there will be other people there, Lucas's friends, some of my colleagues, yet you're welcome to arrive if you want, not as my ex-wife, merely as someone who cares about Lucas. Rachel went, yet she brought a simple gift, a book about resilience that her therapist had recommended, yet with an inscription from her heart. For Lucas, who taught me what true strength looks like, yet I'm still learning. Love, Mom. The party was loud, chaotic, full of children and laughter, yet Rachel stayed at the edges, observing. She watched Michael navigate the chaos with easy confidence, watched Lucas shine in the center of it all, yet she also saw the life they'd created without her, full and rich and complete. At the conclusion of the party, after the other guests had left, Lucas found her sitting quietly in the kitchen. Thanks for coming, he said, yet he held up the book. And thanks for this, yet mostly thanks for showing up. Dad says that's the hardest part. Just keep showing up even when it's awkward. Your dad's right, Rachel said, and I'm trying to learn from the best teacher. Lucas grinned then, yet it was the first completely unguarded smile he'd given her. You're doing okay. Not great yet, but okay is a start.
And it was, and Rachel was finally discovering that okay was enough, that progress wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic transformations, but about small, consistent decisions, yet about showing up even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult.
A year following the media briefing, Michael invited her to a foundation event, yet this time as a volunteer who'd been executing genuine contributions. She'd commenced leading support groups for parents navigating disability services, utilizing her own narrative, carefully, honestly, as a cautionary tale, yet also as hope that people could transform. At the event, standing in a space full of people whose existences the foundation was transforming, Rachel finally comprehended what she'd forfeited and what she might possibly someday earn back. But the loss wasn't the money or the security or the social status. It was the knowledge that she'd departed from people who loved her unconditionally, yet had to discover to love herself initially before she could accept that love. Michael discovered her during a quiet moment, handed her a glass of sparkling water. "You've executed positive work this year," he stated simply. "I've attempted," yet she met his eyes steadily. "I'm still attempting." "I know," Michael stated, and something in his expression shifted. "We both witness it, yet Lucas and I have been conversing, and we desired you to know, you're not on trial anymore. You're not proving yourself. You're merely here. Yet that's sufficient." The words should have brought relief, yet instead they brought fresh tears. "Is it? Is it sufficient after everything?" "It's sufficient for today," Michael stated gently. "Tomorrow? We'll determine tomorrow. But that's all any of us can execute, correct? Just persist showing up for the todays until eventually they add up to something." Rachel nodded, yet she couldn't articulate. Across the space, Lucas was laughing with some other children from his school, yet he caught her eye and waved, not frantically, not with desperation, yet merely normally, like she was someone he was glad to see. That wave, more than anything else, communicated to Rachel that she'd finally found what Michael and Lucas had known all along, that pride could be rebuilt through humility, that existences could be reconstructed from honest rubble, yet that the most powerful empires weren't constructed from money or status. They were constructed from the daily decision to love imperfectly, yet persistently. She'd departed from a disabled husband and their son for a wealthy suitor, yet she'd forfeited a trillion-dollar empire. But more than that, she'd forfeited herself. Yet slowly, painfully, through the grace of two people who had every right to turn away, she was discovering herself again. Not the polished, perfect version she'd attempted to become, yet something messier, more genuine, more human. And in discovering to be human again, Rachel discovered that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in financial accounts, yet in second opportunities offered, in forgiveness earned, in the slow, difficult work of becoming someone worthy of the love she'd once discarded. Yet the narrative wasn't concluded, it was merely commencing. One awkward coffee date, one volunteered hour, one small step at a time towards something she'd finally discovered to value more than all the crystal ballrooms and emerald pendants in the world, the quiet, steady presence of people who selected to love her anyway. 5 years later. 5 years had elapsed since the media briefing that shattered Rachel's pride, but the woman who stood in the foundation's sunlit atrium bore little resemblance to the one who'd fled her engagement celebration in the downpour. Her hair was pulled back simply, her clothes were practical rather than designer, yet her eyes held something they'd never possessed before. Peace earned through 5 years of showing up, even when every instinct screamed to flee. "Mom, you're going to be late," Lucas called from across the lobby, yet his voice carried affection rather than irritation. He was 13 now, taller than Rachel by 3 inches, yet still with that same serious expression that made him seem older than his years. Rachel checked her watch and smiled. "Your dad's the one who's late, not me. Yet there was no edge to it, just the comfortable teasing that had slowly, painfully developed between them over half a decade of consistent effort. "Your dad's always late to his own events," Lucas replied, rolling his eyes with theatrical exasperation. Yet then, Michael emerged from the elevator, his expression harried yet apologetic. Traffic was insane, he stated, yet he was already straightening his tie, shifting into the public persona that still didn't quite fit him despite 5 years of practice. "Is everyone here?" "Everyone except the mayor, but she texted that she's 5 minutes out," Rachel answered, consulting her tablet with the efficiency she'd developed as the Foundation's Director of Family Services. It wasn't a prestigious title, and it certainly didn't come with the social currency of being Mrs. Marcus Whitmore, yet it meant something. Genuine.
Michael acknowledged, yet then he caught Rachel's eye, and something passed between them. Not romance, not anymore, yet something deeper, partnership perhaps, or recognition. Yet mostly it was the acknowledgement of two people who'd traveled impossible distances to reach a place where they could stand in the same space without the burden of the past crushing them both. The Foundation was unveiling its newest initiative today, a nationwide network of support centers for families dealing with sudden disability. Yet the project had been Rachel's idea, born from her own failures and rebuilt through 5 years of listening to other people's narratives. "You ready?" Michael inquired quietly, yet he knew the answer already. "As I'll ever be," Rachel replied, yet her hands were steady as she gathered her notes. 5 years ago they would have been trembling. The auditorium filled rapidly, families the Foundation had assisted, journalists covering the expansion, board members and donors, yet also people from Rachel's past who'd slowly, cautiously filtered back into her existence as she'd proven through years of consistent action that her transformation was genuine rather than performative. Her mother sat in the third row, yet her expression was complicated. They'd rebuilt their relationship slowly through therapy sessions and difficult conversations, yet Ellen Porter had finally accepted that her daughter's new existence, smaller, less glamorous, yet infinitely more meaningful, was a decision rather than a failure. Marcus Whitmore was not in attendance, yet Rachel had heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd married someone else within 6 months of their breakup. She felt nothing about that except a distant relief that she'd escaped before binding herself permanently to an existence that would have destroyed her. Michael opened the ceremony with his characteristic grace, yet Rachel noticed the small changes 5 years had brought. He was more comfortable in his skin now, more willing to claim space, yet he still deflected attention whenever possible, preferring to highlight the people executing the actual work rather than those funding it. When he introduced Rachel, his words were simple, yet devastating in their sincerity. 5 years ago, I communicated a narrative about resilience and redemption, yet I communicated it incompletely. I discussed my own journey, yet I did not discuss the journey of someone who had to travel even further, back from a place of profound regret towards something resembling forgiveness, yet more significantly, towards self-forgiveness. Rachel Porter has spent the last 5 years constructing something remarkable, not from privilege or wealth, yet from the honest acknowledgement of her own failures and the daily decision to execute better. Rachel advanced to the podium with tears already burning behind her eyes, yet she'd discovered to articulate through emotion rather than concealing from it. "Thank you, Michael," she stated, yet then she pivoted to confront the audience fully. 5 years ago, I executed the worst decision of my existence. I abandoned my disabled husband and our young son because I believed that security and status mattered more than love and character. Yet I was incorrect in manners that required years for me to fully comprehend. The space was silent, yet Rachel had communicated this narrative dozens of times now, in support groups, in therapy sessions. Each communication was easier, yet it never ceased hurting, and she'd discovered that was appropriate. Some pains should hurt, because forgetting them meant risking repetition. I can't undo what I executed,
yet I can utilize it. I can accept the worst decision I ever executed and transform it into something that helps other people avoid executing similar mistakes or helps them discover their manner back when they do. Yet this initiative, these support centers we're launching, they're constructed on a simple principle that crisis reveals character, yet character can be rebuilt, not easily, not rapidly, yet consistently through small decisions executed over and over until they become who you are rather than who you were. She articulated for 20 minutes, yet she didn't read from notes. Instead, she communicated narratives, families she'd worked with, parents who'd remained when every instinct said to flee, children who'd forgiven when forgiveness seemed impossible, yet also people who'd left and returned, who'd failed and tried again, who'd proven that redemption was possible even when it seemed impossibly distant. When she finished, the applause was generous, yet Rachel barely heard it. She was regarding Lucas, sitting in the front row between Michael's empty seat and her mother. And her son was smiling, not the careful, guarded smile of their early reunions, yet something open and genuine. After the ceremony, during the reception, people approached Rachel with questions and congratulations, yet she managed it with the same grace she'd discovered from observing Michael over 5 years of weekly coffee dates that had gradually expanded into family dinners, then collaborative work projects, then something that resembled actual co-parenting rather than supervised visits. "That was genuinely positive, Mom," Lucas said, appearing at his elbow with a plate of appetizers he clearly had no intention of consuming. "The part about crisis revealing character, yet not defining it, that's going to help a lot of people." Rachel touched his shoulder briefly, yet she'd learned not to be too effusive, not to demand more affection than he was ready to provide.
Thank you, sweetheart. Yet I discovered it from you and your dad. Lucas shrugged, yet he appeared pleased. Yeah, yet we discovered it by living it. You discovered it by selecting it. Yet Dad says that's actually harder, selecting to transform when you could merely remain comfortable. The wisdom in that observation reminded Rachel that her son was becoming someone extraordinary, yet she couldn't accept credit for it. That was entirely Michael's execution, constructed through years of patient fathering while she'd been chasing fool's gold in crystal ballrooms. "How's school?" Rachel inquired, yet shifting to safer ground. Yet Lucas immediately launched into an explanation of his science fair project that involved water purification systems for developing nations. He was passionate, articulate, focused on executing a difference. Yet Rachel recognized that he'd inherited Michael's heart, even if he'd inherited her stubborn chin. Michael joined them after working the space with practiced efficiency, yet he appeared fatigued. 5 years of managing a foundation with global reach had required their toll, though he'd never complain about it. "You acceptable?" Rachel inquired quietly, yet her concern was genuine rather than performative. "Just contemplating," Michael replied, yet then he smiled slightly. 5 years ago today, we had coffee for the initial time. Do you recall?" Rachel did. She recalled everything about that day, from her trembling hands to Lucas's cautious smile to the manner Michael had pushed that cup of coffee toward her like it was both a test and an invitation. "I recall," she stated softly. "I wasn't certain you'd show up," Michael admitted, yet this was new. He rarely discussed those early months, preferring to focus on the present rather than the painful past. "I thought perhaps witnessing us at the media briefing would be sufficient, that you'd proceed back to your existence and we'd become a narrative you communicated at celebrations about the road not taken." "I almost did," Rachel confessed, yet honesty had become her default setting over 5 years of therapy and difficult work. "I sat outside that coffee establishment for 20 minutes, attempting to decide if I could manage it. Yet then I witnessed you and Lucas through the window, and you were laughing about something, and I realized that departing again would kill whatever small piece of me was still worth preserving." Lucas was observing them both with his characteristic seriousness, yet he didn't interrupt. he'd discovered over the years to let his parents possess these moments. Not romantic, not moving towards reconciliation, yet something equally valuable. Resolution, perhaps, or recognition of the strange, complicated thing they'd constructed from the ruins of their marriage. "I'm glad you remained," Michael stated simply. Yet then he added, "Not for me, not even for Lucas, though he required you more than he could admit, but for you, because the person you've become over these 5 years is someone worth knowing. Yet the person you were 5 years ago was drowning, and observing you drown without being able to assist was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced." The confession hung between them, yet Rachel understood it wasn't meant to wound. It was meant to acknowledge that they'd both suffered, both grown, both traveled impossible distances to reach this moment of standing together without the burden of resentment crushing them. "Can I say something?" Lucas interjected, yet he wasn't really asking permission. "This is going to sound peculiar, yet I think I'm glad everything transpired the manner it did." Both adults pivoted to stare at him, yet Lucas proceeded with the fearless honesty of someone who'd grown up with therapy as normal as breathing. "If you hadn't departed, Mom, you probably would have remained resentful forever. Yet Dad would have felt guilty forever, and I would have grown up in a house full of people who loved each other, yet couldn't appreciate each other. Yet this manner, with you departing and returning, we all had to choose each other. We all had to decide that being family was more significant than being correct or being comfortable. Yet that's stronger than merely never fracturing in the initial place." Rachel felt something crack in her chest, yet it wasn't fracturing, it was the final piece of her carefully assembled guilt falling away. "When did you acquire so wise?" she whispered. "I had good instructors," Lucas replied, yet he looked at both of them equally. "One who taught me how to remain and one who taught me how to return, yet both of those things matter." Michael cleared his throat roughly, yet his eyes were suspiciously bright. "We should probably mingle," he stated, yet nobody moved. Instead, they stood together, not a family in the traditional sense, not anymore, yet something new. Victoria had spent 5 years trying to find the word for what they'd become, yet she'd finally accepted that perhaps there wasn't a word. Perhaps it was merely the three of them, imperfect and complicated, yet choosing each other day after day after day. "Hey," Lucas said suddenly, extracting his phone, "we should take a picture, yet not one of those faked, posed ones, just us like this." He held up his phone, yet the selfie he captured showed 3 people standing close yet not touching, smiling yet not perfectly, together yet maintaining their own space. Rachel on one side, Michael on the other, Lucas in the middle, holding them together not through obligation, yet through decision. "I'm going to print this," Lucas announced, examining the result critically. "Put it in my room next to the one from my 4th birthday. That manner I can recall where we commenced and where we ended up." "We haven't ended up anywhere," Rachel corrected gently. "We're still figuring it out." "Yeah," Lucas concurred, "yet that's kind of the point, right? We're figuring it out together instead of apart." The reception proceeded around them, yet Rachel felt the full burden of the last 5 years settle into something resembling peace. She hadn't acquired her family back, not in the manner she'd once imagined it, not in the manner her mother still sometimes hoped, yet she'd acquired something perhaps more valuable. She'd acquired the chance to be part of their existences, not through entitlement or obligation, yet through earning it, slowly, painfully, one small decision at a time. Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the catering staff were cleaning up, Rachel found herself alone in the Foundation's atrium with Michael. Lucas had departed with Rachel's mother for a promised dinner at his favorite restaurant, yet the 2 adults had remained behind to manage final details. "Thank you," Rachel stated into the comfortable silence. Michael regarded up from his tablet with confusion. "For what?" "For letting me return," Rachel stated simply. "For not making it simple, yet for not making it impossible either. yet mostly for raising Lucas into someone who can hold space for complexity, who can understand that people can be flawed and still worth loving. Michael set down his tablet and regarded her directly. "You medicated that too," he stated quietly. "Not the raising part, I won't pretend you were there for that, yet the part about teaching him that people can change, that matters too. Yet, Rachel, I need to tell you something." Rachel's chest tightened, yet she nodded. "I've been offered a position, heading up a disability rights initiative in Geneva, yet it's a 2-year commitment, and it would mean Lucas and I relocating. Yet I desired to converse with you about it before making any decisions." The old Rachel would have panicked, would have seen this as abandonment or punishment, but 5 years of therapy and growth meant she could hear it for what it was, a professional opportunity and a courtesy. "When?" she inquired calmly. "Not until summer, 6 months, plenty of time to figure out logistics. Yet Lucas is at an age where he could remain with you for part of it, if that's something you both desire. Alternate months, perhaps, or summers and holidays. Yet I desired to see how you felt about that before discussing it with him." Rachel sat with the question, but she didn't rush to answer. 5 years ago, she would have seen this as a test she had to pass, but now she understood it was simply a decision that required honest assessment of her capabilities and limitations. "I'd appreciate that, yet I desired to talk to Lucas about what he desires, not what he thinks we desire him to desire. And I desire to establish regular video calls, clear expectations, systems to make sure he never feels like he's being shuttled around. Yes, I'd appreciate the chance to be his primary parent for part of that time, if he's comfortable with it." Michael smiled, yet it was genuine and warm. "Yet that's precisely the correct answer, not because it's what I desired to hear, because it's thoughtful and honest and puts Lucas first. Yet 5 years ago, you couldn't have given that answer." "5 years ago, I couldn't have medicated a lot of things," Rachel agreed. "Yet I'm not that person anymore. Thank God."
They sat in companionable silence for a moment, yet then Michael stated something that transformed everything. "I'm proud of you, yet I don't know if I've ever stated that. Not because I'm your ex-husband and my opinion should matter, yet because I know how difficult you've worked to become someone different from who you were, and that requires a variety of courage most people never develop." Rachel felt tears threatening, yet she blinked them back. "I had positive motivation. I had a son worth transforming for, an ex-husband who held the door open just wide enough that I could discover my manner back. Yet thank you for stating it, yet more significantly, for meaning it." Michael stood gathering his things, yet he paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he stated, "I don't regret any of it anymore. Not because it wasn't painful, God knows it was, yet because it led here, to this version of us that actually functions. Yet sometimes I think the universe fractures things on purpose, merely to witness if we are brave enough to rebuild them into something new, instead of attempting to glue the old pieces back together." After he departed, Rachel sat alone in the atrium, yet she didn't feel lonely. She felt something else, complete, perhaps, or at least complete enough. She'd spent 5 years attempting to earn back what she'd discarded, yet somewhere along the journey, she'd realized she didn't desire the old existence back. She desired this new one, complicated and imperfect, yet genuine in manners her marriage had never been. Her phone vibrated, a text from Lucas with a photograph of him and his grandmother executing faces at the camera. The message read, "Grandma says to communicate to you the address was perfect. I say it was pretty positive. Love you. Witness you Wednesday." Rachel typed back, "Love you too. Wednesday works. Communicate to Grandma I said thank you." 3 simple exchanges, yet they represented 5 years of rebuilding, of showing up, of earning the right to be part of her son's daily existence rather than a distant memory or cautionary tale.
She stood, gathered her things, yet accepted one final regard around the foundation's atrium. This place, constructed on Michael's wealth, yet dedicated to assisting people who possessed nothing. This space where she'd discovered purpose after years of chasing status. This building that represented everything she'd forfeited and everything she'd discovered in forfeiting it. The woman who'd abandoned her disabled husband and their son for a wealthy suitor was gone. Yet in her place stood someone harder, yet softer, more genuine. Someone who'd possessed her pride crushed and her new existence shattered, yet who'd utilized those broken pieces to construct something infinitely more valuable than what she'd forfeited. Rachel stepped out into the cool evening atmosphere, yet she wasn't fleeing toward anything or away from anything. She was merely advancing, one step at a time, toward an existence that mattered because she'd selected it, rather than fallen into it, toward a family she'd earned rather than inherited, toward a version of herself she actually appreciated regarding in the mirror. The massive trillion-dollar empire she'd unknowingly departed from was never the genuine loss, yet she understood that now. The genuine loss, in the genuine gain in discovering her manor back, had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with the daily decision to be present, to be honest, to be someone her son could respect and her ex-husband could trust, and she herself could finally forgive. 5 years ago, she'd stood in the downpour outside a crystal ballroom and felt her carefully assembled existence crumble. Yet tonight, advancing home to her small Wicker Park apartment with its terrible water pressure and great lighting, Rachel Porter felt something she'd never felt in that Lincoln Park penthouse or at Marcus Whitmore's engagement celebration. She felt like she was precisely where she belonged. Yet more significantly, she felt like she'd earned the right to be there. And that, she'd discovered, was worth more than all the trillion-dollar empires in the world.